What happens when a room full of people underestimate a little girl and her mother finds out about it? It started on a Tuesday morning, just after 9 a.m., the kind of morning where the Alabama sun was already pressing itself against the classroom windows and the ceiling fan in room 14 at Maplewood Elementary was spinning its slow, lazy circles without doing much of anything. The hallways smelled like crayons and floor wax, and the chatter of 22 third graders filled the air the way only children can fill a space, completely, unapologetically, without any awareness of how loud they really are. Her name was Zora Elaine Whitfield, 8 years old, second row from the left, the desk closest to the window. She had box braids pulled into 2 puffs at the top of her head, with little purple butterfly clips at the ends. She wore a lavender sweater over a white collared shirt, and her shoes were the ones with the light-up soles that blinked when she walked. She was the kind of kid who still raised her hand with her whole arm, not just her elbow. The kind who kept her crayons sorted by color in a Ziploc bag. The kind who believed, completely and without any doubt, that the things her mother told her were true. And her mother had told her a great many things. It was career day. Mrs. Pamela Holt had written it on the whiteboard in big green letters, surrounded by little hand-drawn stars. Each student was supposed to stand up, tell the class what their parent or guardian did for work, and then answer a few questions. Simple enough. Sweet enough. The kind of classroom activity designed to make children feel proud of the people who raised them. And for most of the kids in room 14, that's exactly what it was. Tyler said his dad was a firefighter. The class sued on cue. Madison said her mom was a dentist. 3 kids in the front row instinctively covered their mouths. Jalen said his uncle, who raised him, drove an 18-wheeler across state lines. And Mrs. Holt said that was wonderful, that the country needed people like him. The energy in the room was warm, easy, comfortable. Then Mrs. Holt's eyes landed on Zora. Zora didn't hesitate. She stood up straight, the way her mother had taught her, chin up, shoulders back, eyes forward. She smoothed her sweater with both hands and took a breath. "My mom works at NASA," she said. "She's an aerospace engineer." And that was when the laughing started. It didn't come from everywhere at once. It started with one boy, Connor Walsh, sitting 3 desks back, who let out a short, sharp snort like he'd been holding something in and couldn't hold it anymore. Then Tyler picked it up, and then a girl named Brittany in the back row leaned over to whisper something to her friend, and both of them giggled behind their hands. Within 10 seconds, the warmth that had filled the room had curdled into something else. Not cruelty, not exactly. Children don't always know what cruelty is when they're doing it. But it stung the same way regardless. Zora didn't sit back down. She stood there, blinking. Connor Walsh, who had never once in his 8 years of life thought about aerospace engineering, spoke up without raising his hand. "That's not a real job," he said, with the absolute confidence of someone who had never been wrong about anything. "My dad says NASA is just for astronauts." "Yeah," Tyler added, because Tyler never wanted to be left out. "You have to go to space for NASA. Your mom doesn't go to space." Brittany, from the back, said nothing out loud. She just smiled in that particular way that 8-year-old girls sometimes smile when they think someone is embarrassing themselves. Mrs. Holt said, "Okay, let's settle down," in that teacher voice that tries to stop a wave with a raised hand. But Zora had already heard all of it. She sat back down slowly. Her light-up shoes didn't blink. She folded her hands on top of her desk and looked straight ahead at the whiteboard, at those big green letters that said Career Day, and she didn't cry. She wanted to. She could feel the sting behind her eyes, the tightening in her throat. But her mother had told her something about that, too. She had told her, "Baby, some people will not believe you. Not because you're lying, but because believing you would make them uncomfortable. And that's not your problem to carry. You just stand in your truth and let the truth do the rest." Zora held that thought tight, like a purple butterfly clip she wasn't about to let go of. Mrs. Pamela Holt had been teaching 3rd grade at Maplewood Elementary for 11 years. She had a collection of coffee mugs on her desk, a potted succulent named Gerald, and a framed cross-stitch on the wall that said, "Every child is a star." She believed that, genuinely. She wasn't a bad teacher. She wasn't a bad person. But she was the kind of person who made small mistakes in the moment and didn't realize how large they were until much later. And in that moment, when the class laughed at Zora's announcement, Mrs. Holt made one of those small mistakes. She didn't stop it firmly enough. She said, "Okay, settle down," and then moved on to the next student. She didn't turn back to Zora and say, "Actually, there are thousands of engineers at NASA, and they do remarkable work." She didn't validate what the girl had said or push back on the boys who dismissed it. She just moved on, the way teachers sometimes do when they're managing 22 moving pieces and the clock is already ticking toward lunch. She didn't think about it again until later that afternoon when a phone call came into the front office. The office secretary, Ms. Donna, poked her head into room 14 just as the final bell was ringing. She caught Mrs. Holt's eye and gave her a look. The kind of look that meant someone wants to talk to you, and it's not going to be casual. Mrs. Holt met her in the hallway. Apparently, Zora had gone home and told her mother everything. And her mother had not, as some parents might, told her daughter to brush it off and not worry about it. Her mother had listened, really listened, had asked questions, patient and specific, the way engineers are trained to ask questions. I got a full picture, and then she had picked up the phone. But the phone call wasn't angry. That was the thing that caught Mrs. Holt off guard when she heard about it from the secretary. The woman on the other end of the line hadn't shouted, hadn't threatened, hadn't demanded. She had simply asked, in a calm and measured voice, whether it would be possible for her to come in and speak to the class. Just that, just a visit. Mrs. Holt said yes, of course, and scheduled it for Thursday morning, 2 days away. She didn't think much of it. She imagined a polite woman in scrubs or office clothes, maybe bringing in a pamphlet or a printout from the NASA website. She thought it might be a nice little moment, a small correction, a gentle closing of the loop. She had no idea what was coming. The day before the visit, Zora was quiet at school. Not sad quiet, but thinking quiet. There's a difference, and if you've known a child long enough, you learn to tell the two apart. She did her work. She answered questions when called on. She ate her lunch, but she had a stillness about her that wasn't entirely 8 years old. Connor Walsh sat next to her at the reading table that afternoon. He didn't apologize. Connor was the kind of kid who didn't know how to apologize without being told to, and no one had told him to yet. He just sat there, flipping through his book, unbothered in the way only someone who doesn't realize they've done damage can be unbothered. Zora looked at him once, then looked back at her own book. She already knew that tomorrow would say everything she couldn't. Thursday arrived the way important days always do, quietly, without any announcement. Just another morning with the ceiling fan turning and the crayons in their Ziploc bags and Mrs. Holt writing the date on the whiteboard. The class didn't know anything special was happening. Mrs. Holt had simply told them they'd have a guest speaker in the morning, which happened sometimes, and which was usually mildly interesting for about 4 minutes before becoming less interesting. Zora knew, though. She'd been up since 6:15. She'd picked her outfit herself, a deep blue dress with white stars on it, the kind her mom had bought her after a weekend trip to the Kennedy Space Center gift shop 2 summers ago. She wore her butterfly clips again, but these ones were silver. She ate her breakfast without being asked twice. And when she walked into room 14 that morning, she sat down at her desk with her hands folded and her chin up. Mrs. Holt noticed. She noticed the way Zora carried herself like she was waiting for something. Not with nervousness, with certainty. The classroom settled into its morning rhythm. Attendance, announcements over the intercom, a reminder about the book fair. And then, at 9:20, there was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Holt crossed the room and opened it, and the class went quiet in that sudden, involuntary way that rooms go quiet when something walks in that shifts the air. Dr. Renee Whitfield was not a small woman, not in any sense of the word. She was tall, 5'10" at least, with natural hair pulled back into a thick, elegant bun, threaded through with a few strands of gray at the temples that she had never once considered hiding. She wore her NASA badge clipped to the front of a deep navy blazer. Underneath it, a button-down shirt. She carried a leather portfolio and a small rolling case, the kind with a retractable handle. And she moved through the doorway with the specific ease of someone who is accustomed to walking into rooms and commanding them without raising her voice. She did not look like someone who had driven 40 minutes to prove a point. She looked like someone who came to work every day and changed the world before lunch. Mrs. Holt extended her hand and said, "Dr. Whitfield, thank you so much for coming." And the doctor landed on the room like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples everywhere immediately. Dr. Whitfield shook her hand warmly and turned to face the class. 22 pairs of eyes stared back at her. Some were politely curious. Some were confused. And some, the ones belonging to children who had laughed 2 days ago, were beginning to experience a feeling they didn't have a word for yet. It would eventually become known to them as the feeling of being wrong in front of other people. "Good morning," Dr. Whitfield said. Her voice was warm but full, the kind of voice that had given presentations at congressional briefings and international aerospace conferences, the kind that was used to being heard. "My name is Dr. Renee Whitfield, and I believe some of you already know my daughter." She turned just slightly and looked at Zora. Zora looked back at her mother, and for the first time that week, she smiled. Not a small smile, a real one. Dr. Whitfield set her portfolio on Mrs. Holt's desk, unzipped her rolling case, and began to set things out on the table at the front of the room. A small model of the James Webb Space Telescope, roughly the size of a shoebox, built from precise components. A laminated diagram of a rocket propulsion system, annotated in her own handwriting. A thick-bound report with a red government cover, the kind with security stamps and official seals. And her badge, which she unclipped from her jacket and held up so every child in the room could read it. NASA, Aerospace Systems Engineer, Dr. Renee A. Whitfield. Connor Walsh read it from 3 rows back and felt something shift in his chest. He wasn't entirely sure what it was. He would spend the rest of 3rd grade trying to put a name to it. "Let me tell you what I do," Dr. Whitfield began, pulling a chair around to the front of the desk and sitting down at the children's eye level, because she had done enough presentations to know that posture matters, that meeting someone where there is not a weakness but a skill. "I'm an aerospace engineer. That means I help design and test the systems that allow spacecraft to function in space. The thrusters that push a satellite into orbit. The thermal shields that protect instruments from the cold of deep space. The communications arrays that let a probe launched 17 years ago still send data back to Earth from 14 billion miles away." She paused. "That probe is called Voyager 1. It is the farthest human-made object in the history of the world. And systems like the ones I work on are why it's still talking to us." The room was completely still. Not the restless, obligatory stillness of children being managed. The real kind. The kind that meant something had gotten through. Mrs. Holt stood by the whiteboard with her arms crossed and her eyes wide. She was doing the quiet math of a teacher who realized she had missed something significant and was now watching someone else correct it with grace. A girl named Aaliyah, who sat directly behind Zora, raised her hand. "Do you ever go to space?" she asked. Dr. Whitfield smiled. "I don't. My job is on the ground. I'm part of the team that makes sure the things we send to space don't fail. Some people go to space. Many more of us make it possible for them to. Both jobs matter." Tyler, who had been sitting very quietly since Dr. Whitfield walked in, raised his hand with visible hesitation. "I said, He started, then stopped, then tried again. "I said NASA was just for astronauts." On Tuesday, Dr. Whitfield looked at him, not with punishment in her eyes, just with a steady, patient gaze. "A lot of people think that," she said evenly. "That's why I'm here. NASA has about 17,000 employees. About 39% of them are engineers. We have biologists, mathematicians, software developers, climate scientists, historians, lawyers, and yes, astronauts. But the astronauts could not do what they do without every single one of the rest of us." She let that settle. "The person who packs the parachute matters as much as the person who jumps." It was Tyler who glanced over at Zora first. Not to apologize, not yet. Just to look. And Zora, who was watching her mother with the particular pride of a child who has always known something that the world keeps, tried to talk her out of, happened to glance back. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Dr. Whitfield opened her portfolio and pulled out a photograph. She held it up for the class. It was a wide image, printed on glossy paper, the kind you'd see in a science magazine. A deep blue-black sky filled with a wash of stars and light, shapes that looked like brushstrokes, smears of gold and pink, impossibly distant. This, she said quietly, is the first full-color image ever captured by the James Webb Space Telescope. It shows galaxies that formed less than 1 billion years after the Big Bang. Light that has been traveling for 13 billion years finally reaching us. She turned the photograph slowly so each side of the room could see. I was on the team that worked on the propulsion system for the telescope's journey to its orbit point, approximately 1 million miles from Earth. A boy named Marcus, who had been sitting in the corner playing with the zipper on his jacket for most of the morning, completely stopped. He stared at the photo. "You helped make that possible?" he asked. "My team did," she said, "and I am part of my team." She set the photo down and looked at the class. There was something in her expression that was difficult to define. Not triumph, not satisfaction exactly, more like the feeling of returning somewhere that needed her and delivering something overdue. "I grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama," she said. "I want you to know that because I want you to understand that where you start does not determine where you go. My mother was a teacher. My father laid tile. Neither of them had been to college. And I sat in a classroom very much like this one when I was very much your age and told my class that I wanted to work for NASA one day." She paused. They laughed at me, too. The silence that followed that sentence was different from any silence that had come before it in room 14 that morning. It was the kind of silence that happens when a room full of people, even 8-year-old people, collectively understands that they are inside a moment that is larger than they first thought. Connor Walsh put his head down, not in shame, not dramatically, just quietly. The way a person sets something down when they realize they've been carrying it wrong. Dr. Whitfield continued, "I want to tell you something else. When my daughter came home on Tuesday and told me what happened in this room, I wasn't angry. I was something else. I was reminded." She folded her hands in her lap. "I was reminded that the most important thing I can give her isn't a fancy title or a badge or a photograph of a galaxy. The most important thing I can give her is the ability to stand in the truth of who she is, even when the room laughs." She looked at Zora. She did that. She stood in it. And then she came home and told me, calmly, with her chin up, and let me handle the rest. Zora looked at her desk for just a moment, and then looked back up, and the butterfly clips caught the light. Mrs. Holt made a sound that she quickly converted into a cleared throat. It almost worked. The questions began to come, one after another, the way questions come from third graders once the gate is opened. How big was the rocket? How cold was space? Could people live on Mars? How long did it take to become an engineer? Was it hard? What math did she use? Could a kid do it? Dr. Whitfield answered every single one, not with the rushed, half-present energy of someone who was watching the clock, but fully, completely, with eye contact and patience and follow-up questions of her own. "What made you think of that?" she asked Marcus, after he wondered aloud about terraforming. He straightened up in his seat like a weed that had been given sun for the first time. The small model of the James Webb Telescope made its way around the room, handled with that particular careful reverence children reserve for things that feel important. Connor Walsh held it for a long time before passing it on. Aaliyah, who had been furiously writing something in her notebook since the presentation began, held up a page covered in neat, round handwriting. "I wrote down all your jobs," she announced, as though this were information Dr. Whitfield would need. Dr. Whitfield asked if she could see it, and Aaliyah brought it forward, and the two of them looked at it together, heads close, the scientist and the 8-year-old who had decided she was taking notes. "This is excellent," Dr. Whitfield told her. "You should keep that." Aaliyah went back to her seat holding that piece of paper like it was a deed to something. 40 minutes passed before anyone noticed. Mrs. Holt had stopped glancing at the clock. The classroom had become something it wasn't always, a real place where real things were happening, where children were leaning forward in their chairs because the world had gotten bigger without anyone leaving the room. When the session wound down, Dr. Whitfield stood and began to collect her materials. She repacked the rolling case, folded the laminated diagram, tucked the government report back into her portfolio. She reclipped her badge to her blazer, and she turned to the class one final time. "I'm going to tell you something that took me a long time to learn," she said, and the room went quiet again on its own, without anyone asking it to. The people who laughed at me when I was your age, some of them probably forgot they ever did it. But I never forgot, not because I was bitter, but because it became fuel. Every time someone told me that my dream was too big, or too unlikely, or too much for a girl from Tuscaloosa who didn't come from money or connections or the right kind of name, I kept a quiet count. She tapped her chest twice, just over her heart. And then I went and did the work. And the work became proof. And the proof became everything. She picked up her portfolio. You're 8 years old. Every single one of you has enough time, enough room, and enough capacity to become something this world is not yet ready for. Don't let anyone else's surprise at your dreams become a ceiling. She looked, just once more, at her daughter. You already know who you are. Just keep going. And then she walked to the door, opened it, and was gone. The room stayed quiet for a full 4 seconds, which for third graders is essentially an eternity. And then everyone started talking at once. Mrs. Holt stood at the front of the room with her hands clasped and her eyes a little bright, in that way that adults' eyes get when they've been given something they didn't know they needed. She looked at her class, looked at the energy in the room, the way Marcus was asking Tyler something with genuine animation, the way Aaliyah was adding to her notes, the way Connor Walsh was looking at the little model telescope that was still sitting on the edge of his desk before he picked it up and walked over and set it quietly on Zora's desk. He didn't say anything. No apology shaped with the right words. He was 8. He was working with what he had. Zora looked at the model, then looked at him. Thanks, she said. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, Room 14 was not transformed overnight into a perfect little utopia of understanding and equity. Children are not machines that can be reprogrammed in a single morning. Connor still talked too loud sometimes. Tyler still didn't always raise his hand. Brittany still whispered things she shouldn't. But something had shifted, something small and permanent, the way a dent in metal doesn't go back. Aaliyah started a notebook. She labeled it on the cover in purple marker, Women Who Build Things. She asked Mrs. Holt for help printing pictures from the internet. Katherine Johnson, May C. Jemison, Gladys West. And on the first page, the name she wrote biggest, with the most deliberate letters. Dr. Renee Whitfield, aerospace engineer, NASA. Mrs. Holt wrote Dr. Whitfield a letter. 2 full pages handwritten on school letterhead. She wrote about the silence in the room when Dr. Whitfield walked in, about the questions that wouldn't stop coming, about Connor Walsh and the telescope model. She wrote, near the end, I've been teaching for 11 years, and I missed something in that first moment that I should not have missed. I am grateful your daughter has the kind of mother who came back and showed us all what we were looking at. She mailed it to the NASA address on the badge Dr. Whitfield had left a photocopy of at the class's request so they could put on the bulletin board. Dr. Whitfield received the letter on a Wednesday morning between back-to-back project reviews. She read it at her desk once, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer where she kept the things that mattered. Zora finished 3rd grade with the same box braids, the same light-up shoes, the same habit of raising her hand with her whole arm. She wrote her end-of-year Who I Want to Be essay about becoming an engineer, specifically a propulsion systems engineer, specifically someone who worked on deep space probes, specifically someone whose work would still be running 17 years from now. Mrs. Holt gave it an A and wrote in the margin, in red pen, I believe you. That summer, Dr. Whitfield took Zora on a trip to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. They stood in the clean room and looked through the glass at engineers in white suits working on hardware that would one day leave the Earth. Zora pressed her palm flat against the glass and stared for so long that her breath fogged the surface. Is that what you do? She asked. Something like it, her mother said. Zora nodded. I'm going to do that, she said. Not like a wish, not like a dream, like a plan she was already executing. Dr. Whitfield put her hand on her daughter's shoulder and kept it there. And this is the part of the story that people sometimes miss when they talk about moments like the one in Room 14. They talk about the mother, about the entrance, about the badge and the blazer and the photograph of 13-billion-year-old light. And those things matter. They do. But the real story is an 8-year-old girl who stood up in front of 22 other children and said something true and got laughed at and didn't collapse. who went home and told her mother calmly, with her chin up, and let the truth do its own heavy lifting. The class laughed, and she stood there anyway. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. Because the world is full of rooms that will laugh, full of moments designed, intentionally or not, to make you sit back down and revise yourself into something smaller and safer and more acceptable. And the question is not whether those moments will happen. They will. The question is what you do while you're still standing. Zora Elaine Whitfield, 8 years old, box braids, butterfly clips, light-up shoes, stayed standing. And her mother made sure the room understood why. Dr. Renee Whitfield has given 3 more classroom visits since that Thursday morning in room 14. She doesn't advertise them. She doesn't post about them. She just shows up with her rolling case and her badge and her photograph of light that is older than anything human hands have ever touched. And she sits down at eye level with whoever is in front of her, and she tells them what she does, and she answers every question, and she looks at the quiet kid in the corner who hasn't said anything yet, and she makes sure to get there before the hour is up. Because she knows what it costs to be told you don't belong in a room where you're already sitting. And she knows what it means when someone walks in and proves that you do. And Zora? Zora keeps going. One word at a time. One problem at a time. One truth at a time. Just like she was always going to. Never let anyone's disbelief become the boundary of your possible. The laughs in that room didn't decide what Zora would become. They just made the moment her mother walked in a little more worth waiting for. If you know a little girl who's been told her dream is too big, share this story. Because someone needs to hear it today, and maybe that someone is the one doing the telling.